I'm now going to continue my video series on Henry Ward Beecher and his sermons with a thought-provoking question. What if Jesus told you what would happen to you in the future? Many people would struggle trying to answer this question. Let me explain. Let's say Jesus came to you and told you that you were going to play in a football game. Then he told you that you would easily win the football game. As you leave the locker room and you walk towards the field, would you be thinking about game strategy? Would you play the game with the same enthusiasm? Think very carefully. Imagine the dread that Peter must have felt after Jesus told him that he was going to be shackled and imprisoned later in life. And just imagine how you would react if Jesus came to you and said, hey, look, you're going to be shackled and imprisoned in your elderly days. How would you feel about that? Think very carefully. It's a very unsettling thing to have happen to you, okay? Not that it's ever happened to me, but if it did happen to you, it would be very unsettling. I can tell you that right now. When people today read this story, which was written in the Gospel of John, it was actually written as the very last chapter of the Gospel of John. So if you go to the book of John, you go to the very last chapter, you'll find this little story, okay? They have to keep in mind that modern psychology books weren't available in first century Jerusalem. But Jesus didn't need a modern psychology book. He knew the hearts and minds of all of his disciples. So he didn't hesitate when he told Peter about his future. And the reason was, Jesus already knew how Peter was going to react to the news about his future. He already knew that. But here's the thing. When Peter made his response to Jesus, Peter had no idea how John would react to the news about his future. He didn't know that. Remember, Peter did not have extrasensory perception. He hadn't completed any modern psychology courses, so he really had no clue as to how John would react if Jesus had told John about his future. Peter didn't know any of that. See what I mean? Now, I'm sure Peter cared about John's well-being. That's not in question here. But Peter did not think about what John would do if John knew anything about his future. Peter wasn't thinking about that. This is part of the reason why Jesus, in his own nice, kind way, was rebuking Peter for Peter's question. See what I mean? Now, I'm also pretty sure that Peter he probably never gave it a single thought that by asking this question, he was accidentally undermining the authority of Jesus. He never thought about that. He was on this pity party. Well, you told me about my future, why didn't you tell John about his? That's not fair. He was literally telling Jesus that Jesus was unfair. But he didn't realize the ramifications of what he was doing. He was at a pity party. So, he blundered bad. And that's why Jesus had to correct him. Okay? Think about this for a second. Did Peter, when he asked Jesus that question, did Peter ever think about what he would gain by knowing this information? Was Peter going to gain anything by knowing John's future? Was John going to gain anything by knowing his future? Probably not. Did Peter ever think for 1 second how this information might have affected John's future? Shoot, if John had thought that he was going to be brutally beaten and tortured and possibly even killed for ministering for Jesus, maybe John wouldn't have wanted to be a part of the ministry anymore. Well, I want to die for that. See what I mean? Maybe John's psychological well-being wasn't as stable as Peter's. But Peter never thought about that. See what I mean? Did Peter consider Jesus' motivation for telling Peter about his future and not telling John about his? Jesus had a reason for telling Peter about his future. Jesus also had a reason for not telling John about his. Did Peter ever think about what those reasons were? Did he ask Jesus why he told him about his future and didn't tell John about his? No, of course not. So, in Peter's accidental way, he was actually saying, hey, I don't trust you, Jesus. That's not a good thing to tell Jesus. I know Jesus knew that Peter was not deliberately trying to say, hey, I don't trust you, but that's it. In essence how it came out. Well, I don't trust you. And like I said, by Peter unintentionally saying that Jesus was being unfair, that was kind of undermining the authority of Jesus. And Jesus was like, don't do that. Okay? Now, this message can be used, or actually misused, and warped by false shepherds. They can stand there. Some false shepherd can come to you and say, hey, don't question my ministry. Don't question my current ministry. Don't question my future ministry. Jesus wouldn't approve. That is not the message here. The message was a quick cure to Peter's pity pot party. It had nothing to do with questioning the ministry of false shepherds. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. When you figure out that somebody is not truly a part of the ministry of Jesus, don't follow them anymore. And encourage others not to do the same thing. You don't want to be led astray by, well, a good example is Jim Jones. You don't want to be led away by somebody like Jim Jones or David Koresh. See what I mean? That's a bad thing. So this story had nothing to do with false shepherds whatsoever. Now keep in mind, when we open ourselves to God's will, God shows us where He wants us to conduct our ministry. He says, look, I want you to go here. I don't want you to go there. I want you to go here. And He'll show you exactly where He wants you to go to conduct your ministry. Jesus will also send people to your ministry. You won't have to look very hard. They'll just be right there. See what I mean? Now, God will also utilize our talents to minister to people. Now, here's the key. Here's the big key right here. There are a lot of false shepherds that will come to you and say, the only thing you ever have to learn is the Bible and that's it. Well, first you have to learn how to read, because otherwise you can't read the Bible. That's number one. Number two, when they're telling you something like that, they are absolutely false shepherds. Here's why. Your education should be a God-centered education. At the core of your morality core should be the Bible. No question about it. But God can't use the talents you don't have. God can't make you an accountant unless you know accounting. He can't make you a great speech orator if you have no speech skills. See what I mean? He can't send you to people that speak in foreign tongues to minister unto them because you don't know how to speak to them. See what I mean? Whenever you learn anything from computer technology to mathematics to accounting to whatever in the heck you learn, even foreign languages, when you learn anything like that, you learn it for a reason, and the reason is that you are giving God something to use. You're actually saying, God, I am learning this so I can be a better minister for you. Okay? I can do more with my ministry now because I've learned this. What you're doing in essence is saying, God, I learned this specifically so that you could use me in this area. So there's nothing wrong with learning other things besides the Bible. The question is, why are you learning it? Are you learning it to do the ministry God wants you to do? Or are you learning it for selfish reasons? And that's the difference. Whatever you learn in the line of an academic skill, you make sure you put it to good use in God's ministry. That's the key. Okay? Now, we should be so busy with our ministry, okay, that we shouldn't have time to think about the ministry of anybody else. Now, here's the thing. keep in mind that both Peter and John were followers of Jesus for 3 solid years. Okay? So Peter knew that John was going to run a good ministry. John already knew that Peter was going to run a good ministry, so they didn't have to question each other's ministry. Okay? But that's not quite so easy in our modern day society. There are a lot of false shepherds out there, and they do lead a lot of people astray. Now, if God wants you to deal with that situation, here's what God will do. He'll not only make you aware of that situation, but he'll also, in God's own way, he'll give you instructions on how to lead the lost sheep back to God. That's the whole goal. You're not leading the false sheep, you're not leading the lost sheep. You're not leading the lost sheep back to you. You're leading the lost sheep back to God. And God will tell you what to do about that. Okay? If that's what God wants you to do. So if God says, hey, look, that guy over there, he's a false shepherd. I want you to lead that flock over there. They're going astray. I want you to lead them back to me. Then all you have to do is listen to what God tells you to do, and that's what you do. Okay? It's a real shame that more people didn't listen to God when it came to Jim Jones, and more people didn't listen to God when it came to David Koresh. Because if they had, there's a good chance that neither one of those men, neither Jim Jones nor David Koresh, would have been able to have led very many people, if anybody, astray. Because God could have utilized real ministers, real reverends, real Christians to have gotten those lost sheep out of there before Jim Jones and David Koresh went down. See what I mean? So if God wants you to get back his lost sheep, he'll tell you how to do it. So until God says, hey, look, that's a false shepherd, and this is the way I want you to deal with the situation, get busy with your own ministry, and don't worry about anybody else's ministry. Sure, you want to worry about their education, but not their ministry. Don't get involved in their ministry unless God says get involved with their ministry. Because God has a purpose for them, and he has a purpose for you. If you keep getting involved in their ministry, you're not going to do yours very well. And God wants you to do your ministry to the best of your ability. Whew. And the final thing I'll say is this. Parents, you can decide what your children learn. And I wish more parents would do that. But you can't decide what ministry your children are going to get involved in. Okay? Some children will be singers. Some children will be preachers. Some children will grow up and they'll be the ones serving the poor. There's always going to be poor people in the world because they have financial hard times. There's always going to be financial hard times in the world. But there is a great big difference between financial hard times and perpetual poverty. What I'm trying to fix is perpetual poverty, not financial hard times. Everybody's going to fall on hard times at some point in their future. God guarantees that. Let me tell you something. Satan doesn't want you to be happy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's why he's going to make situations where you're going to have hard times, and a lot of it will be financial hard times. But you can have a financial hard time without true hopelessness, and that's the difference. You can overcome a financial hard time, okay? But perpetual poverty can only be cured through a proper education, and that's what I provide on this YouTube channel. So don't get to thinking that when you learn all the stuff you've learned from me, that your financial hard times are going to be over. They're not. But it won't be hopeless anymore. It'll be tough, but not hopeless. Let me tell you something. I live a debt-free life, but I still have financial hard times. Things don't always come easy for me, nor do I expect them to. But I'm not in massive debt. I'm not out on the streets. I'm still eating my food, and I still have clothes to wear. That's the difference. And I still have a roof over my head. And a pet cat. So, I also have an older sister too, so really nice. Anyway, I do tend to babble, but I thought I'd share this with you. Don't be so anxious to know about your future or anybody else's future. And don't get involved in somebody else's ministry unless God wants you to get involved. Sure, encourage people to learn more stuff. I never said that. But don't get involved in a ministry unless God wants you to. All right. That's all I've got to say for this evening. Thank you very much for watching. I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.